You're listening to the Confidence Within podcast. If you are a successful professional entrepreneur who is nonetheless struggling with the fear of public speaking, then you are in the right place. This podcast is all about igniting your inner confidence, learning to show up with genuine authority and brilliance, and becoming the best version of yourself. I'm your host, Victoria Lyazniansky, and welcome to my show. Hello, and welcome to this episode of the Confidence Within podcast. Have you ever had a great idea, a project you were passionate about, or a promotion you wanted but struggled to get others on board? The truth is that whether you're leading a team, presenting to executives, interviewing for a new role, or growing a business, you are always selling something. The question is, how do you influence others without feeling pushy, manipulative, or salesy? That's exactly what we're discussing today with my guest, Dan Rochon. Dan is a keynote speaker, sales psychology expert, and author of Teach to Sell: Why Top Performers Never Sell and What They Do Instead. Dan is a master of neurolinguistic programming and has helped thousands of business owners and real estate professionals unlock consistent, predictable income. Since 2008, he's lived by one powerful promise: no broke month. As a highly sought-after speaker, Dan shares how top performers succeed without chasing, convincing, or closing, and instead they lead with clarity, influence, and alignment. His Teach to Sell method will help you shift from selling to leading so you can grow your income in a way that's both strategic and true to who you are. You can get your copy of Teach to Sell, published by Simon & Schuster, by visiting www.teachtosellbook.com. Please welcome Dan to the show. Well, hello, Dan. I'm so excited to have you on my podcast.
Thank you, Victoria. I'm excited to be here.
I'm so looking forward to this conversation because you bring so much wisdom to this podcast. I haven't had anybody on this podcast quite like you who had a similar skill set, because what you teach and what you write about and what you speak about is selling, but in a different way than how most people speak about it. And so I have a lot of questions about this, and I think our audience is gonna absolutely love what you have to share. But let's start with something that I think every high-level professional, every manager, every executive has to deal with every single day, and that is making decisions under pressure. I know you have a special framework, so would you mind sharing it with my viewers?
Oh, absolutely. So, under pressure and leaders in the corporate world, or, entrepreneurs and business leaders just in general, we face this every day. And, when we're under pressure, people, they typically default to emotional driven decisions, and a leader's language, their words, their tone, their framing, it's either going to escalate the stress or create, trust and clarity. And so it's understanding about how to manage this and using the shift of replacing a reactive approach, which is what many leaders are in a reactive mode, with intentional influence. And so how do you do that? Well, the reality of it is we all have common things that happen, within our businesses, whether that's a common challenge with a client or an opportunity with a client, or something common within your own, the people who you lead. And so what we do is, what I recommend is in what I teach and Teach to Sell is called the pre-decision compass. So instead of waiting for you to deal with a hard problem, decide now what it's going to be. I once owned a business with around 150 or so employees. And what would happen is I'd have the people come to me almost on a daily basis saying to me, hey, Dan, can I have this? Or, hey, Dan, can I have that? And sometimes I recognize that one request would benefit an individual, but it would not help others, okay, within the organization. So that's when I discovered the pre-decision compass, because I made the point at that point to say, well, if this is something that I've, encountered, and it's a tough emotional decision, right? And that's where we default. So instead of doing that, let me make the decision of what I'm going to do before I have to face that. And that's what's called the pre-decision compass. So I have maybe, I don't know, 20, 30 pre-decision compasses in business where I don't have to think at all. So basically anything that causes you stress that you have to make a similar decision more than once, decide now how to be able to deal with that before you're in that place. And that's the approach that we take to be able to deal with that pressure and to be able to calmly make decisions that are going to be better decisions.
I love this. So it's basically creating a system in a way, which
Yeah.
kind of reminds me, funny enough, it reminds me of the book E-Myth Revisited, right?
Oh, sure.
You're literally creating a system,
Yeah.
how I'm going to approach various stressful decisions that potentially I'll have to make, and I'm going to make them now. I'm going to figure out all of those situations and make the decision now versus
Yeah, it's going to be your compass,
under
whether it
stress.
be, like I gave you an example of, like if more than one person within your organization are asking for things that are going to go in different directions, then my decision I've already made is I'm going to make the decisions that's going to benefit the organization first, the client second, and do so wholly, right? Rather than one individual that is pressing me to, buy them some sort of system or resource or whatever the case may be.
Mm-hmm. That makes a lot of sense. Now, what do you do if a situation arises that you haven't made
Oh, sure.
a structure, a system for?
Well, notice is what you do. And so that's how you collect, when I said I have 20 or 30 pre-decisions that I use in my business, none of those were, foresight. Those were all experience, right? And so and for me, that's another pre-decision that I have. If I have a decision that causes me stress that I have to make more than one time, then that tells me, okay, figure out what your decision is going to be in the future. Okay. So, but every single one of my pre-decisions came from that stress, came from that anxiety, came from that pull from me. And so that's the way that as a leader, the way that you can, like I said, if you get it more than once, if you get the same type of decision twice and it causes you that anxiety, that's the one right there to be able to put a pre-decision compass around and decide the third time and every time after that, what your decision is going to be moving forward.
Right. So this matrix, this system becomes truly a living and breathing document that you update as you go along, as you go through your business, or as you continue within your organization.
Yeah, I mean, you could update it. I mean, I don't even have mine written down, right? But I just know, like I've been doing business for so long, like I just know, and the same types of decisions that are going to be coming up, right? And so, and really, I did this because I wanted to make it easy, right? And it's the same way with, consulting a client, for example, right? If you come across the same objections, well, decide to be able to handle the objections before you get them, not when you get them. So for me, like for an example, an objection from a client or even an employee, nonetheless, any objection at all, an objection is just feedback that you screwed the process up. Okay. And what I mean by that is if your sales process is systematic and your sales process is allowing for you to be able to perceive or to identify any predictable problems, to identify any objections, you should be handling those objections well before you get them. So that, when you're ready to meet with somebody, when you pre-sell them, when you teach to sell, when you actually meet with them, you're there for two reasons: to consult and to get hired. All right. So it's the same technology, whether you use it in the marketplace, selling your product or service, or if you use it, in your leadership, guiding your vendors, your clients, your staff, yourself, whatever the case may be. This technology works, in any context.
I want to take just a quick moment to share something special with you that I know will resonate. If your struggle with public speaking anxiety prevents you from showing up as the leader and expert that you know you are, I totally get it. I've been there. That's why I created a free guide for you. 5 proven steps to boost your public speaking confidence right now. This guide is packed with practical tips you can implement immediately to help you calm your nerves, command the room, and speak with genuine confidence. You can grab it right now at guide.confidencewithinpodcast.com. All right, let's dive back into the conversation. And this is kind of our little segue into talking about speaking to sell, which is exactly what you specialize in. And, it's interesting because as I was thinking about our conversation, everyone is selling something.
Oh, sure.
And you may say, well, but I am in the corporate world and I'm not in the sales profession. And I am maybe, I don't know, maybe I'm a VP of finance. What am I selling? You're always selling something. You're selling your ideas. You're selling the projects you're working on. You're selling yourself. So how do you speak to sell when you're not, let's say, actively selling? So let's say you're speaking to sell your idea.
Okay.
What would you recommend for that?
Well, there's a 3-step process I go through in the book. It teaches how, and the 3 steps are to be able to be in rapport. I'll tell you more about that in a second. Secondly, is to ask adept questions, and then thirdly is to actively listen. And so we want to start with what is rapport. So rapport is a connection, but what is a connection of? According to Pierre Teilhard de Chardin, who was a French philosopher and priest in the early 1900s, he taught us that we are spiritual beings manifested in a human condition. Now, I'm not going to get into, beliefs and all that. And so you may believe that, you may not believe that. I happen to believe that, and I respect anybody who's listening to that does not. But what I recognize is that we all have something within this human body. I call it a spirit. And when you're able to, like Victoria, when you and I are talking, when I'm able to connect with you energetically, then that is what we call rapport. And before I start in any conversation, I want to be connected with you. Now, this could be in dating, this could be in business, this could be in your current relationship, friends, whatever the case may be. So, step one is to build rapport. That's a connection of energy. Step two is to then ask adept questions. And adept question is designed to be able to dive deep. So rather than going wide, which is like just getting like the surface level, hey, what do you want to buy? Well, I want to buy this widget with ABC. Okay, great. Do you want D, E, F? Yeah, fantastic. All right. So those are surface level questions. An adept question would dive deeper. Say, okay, well, tell me more about what your need is, and how long have you had this challenge? And if that challenge doesn't get solved, then what will happen next? And when that challenge does get solved, what does that provide for you? And so you can see it's really you're diving deep. And then as the person is giving you answers, then you can just simply say, well, tell me more about that. And then, well, I heard you say Victoria ABC. Am I understanding you correct? Yeah. Okay. Fantastic. So you're confirming, you're diving deeper, and you're being able to really discover exactly what their emotional needs are. And ideally, you're looking for a pain. And because people are going to move away from pain towards desire, and then you as a sales professional or as a corporate leader, your job is then to be able to be the bridge between the pain and the desire. All right. And that's asking adept questions is going to allow for you to do that. So step one, again, is to be in rapport. Step two is to ask adept questions. And step three is to then actively listen. And what are you actively listening to? You're actively listening to the energy. Okay. So when I say something, let's say if I'm, consulting two people and I say, hey, do you want to buy this product? One says, yeah, let's do it. And the other says, yeah, right. You got a yes from both, but you didn't get a yes from both. And if you're paying attention to the energy, you identify that second yes. And in that case, I just simply look at that person who gave me a yes by their words, but not by their energy. And I just simply say, oh, so what's causing you not to say yes? And when you say that to them, they don't even recognize they just said yes to you, right? When you say that to them, now they uncover what's actually important. So when you use the CPI communication model, and CPI stands for consistent predictable income, which is what I just described, be in rapport, ask adept questions, actively listen. That's a methodology and a tool that's a part of the teach to sell methodologies to be able to allow for you to influence ethically.
Mm-hmm. Talk to me about influencing ethically, because that's not a concept that a lot of people talk about. And I just want to dive into this first before I ask you more questions about the actual selling part of it.
Yeah, absolutely. So, and that's a great question. So so I just gave you the method. Okay. Mm-hmm. Now here's a difference between ethical influence and manipulation. It is whose interests are you focusing on? Are you focusing on the person who you're leading? That would be ethical influence. Or are you focusing on your own ambitions and goals? That would be manipulation. Now, ideally, those two things align. Okay. Now, if they don't align in your business leader, well, then maybe you got the wrong person in that role. And that's a whole different conversation to have. Right. But if they do align and you're positioning yourself to put the other person first, now that I'm putting that person first and I go through and I discover what's important to them by being in rapport, asking adept questions, actively listening. And now I could be able to guide them through smart questioning to be able to teach them how to think so that they can get what they want. And when you approach it in that manner, that is ethical influence, which is different than manipulation, which is what's in it for me.
Right, right. So what happens in the corporate environment quite a lot during meetings is that you may have a project that you're passionate about that you are trying to sell to the rest of the team.
Sure.
Which becomes, sort of a selling situation. So how do we literally take this and apply your methodology? So I have, let's say I am IT director, and we would like to introduce a project, internal project for the organization, and I'm trying to sell it to the rest of the C-suite people or VPs, and I have to sell it to finance, I have to sell it to marketing. We would like to work on this project, and I'm very passionate about it. How would you apply this methodology to this certain situation, to this kind of situation where you're not really selling per se, but you are selling. But you are selling,
yeah.
Right?
Yeah, I mean, we all sell. It's whether if you're selling an idea, you're selling a product, a vision, a service. We're all selling. To answer your question, Victoria, so when I had a decision. This was many years ago. And I was the owner of the company. I had a CEO, and then they had a board. And so, but ultimately, it was still my decision to make. But I don't in that context, I didn't like making decisions because I didn't want to take away from the authority of those that I led. And so, what I recognized was one time we needed to change locations and physical locations. And so, there was the top 3 locations that were options. And there was one that was really standing out to us. And so there's maybe around 7 people or so I needed influence. So it's very similar, sort of like multiple people, multiple perspectives, viewpoints, et cetera. And so what I did was I knew that economically and for many other reasons, one of those 3 was my choice. And I wanted to make sure that choice was taken. Okay. Now I could have overridden anybody to just say, "Hey, I'm the guy signing the lease." So, but I don't like to do that. So instead, I'd rather get alignment. I'd rather get cohesion. And so identify if there's one location that we want, who's going to be the antagonist. Okay. Who's going to be the one that's really going to be vocal as a no. And so my recommendation is don't wait until you're in the boardroom meeting to sell. You got to sell before. That is teach to sell. That is the concept of teach to sell. You talk to those, in this case, 7 individuals, sort of do a lukewarm, what are you feeling type test, and identify who's really opposed to this. The ones that are really opposed to this, you get that person on your side. Now in the group, you're good. And in fact, take it a step further, you get that person on your side and you get them to actually propose the idea. The one that would otherwise, if you didn't do the legwork before the meeting, now you've got your greatest potential adversary that's being your greatest advocate. And so teach to sell is about what do you do before you need to do it. So whether that's influence your board, influence different members within your company, you go into different entities, different departments, the finance department, the marketing department, the service, the sales, and you're gaining alignment. Do that before you get in that room, because if you get in that room, it's going to be really pretty much, it's hard to, you can do it, but it is hard to be able to influence in that context. You really have to do the work up front.
Mm-hmm. And what it also sounds like is that you're trying to influence, obviously ethically, but you're trying to influence in a way that it becomes, oh, it's my idea. I was actually thinking that. You're literally encouraging them to think it's their idea, which, funny enough, reminds me of, you probably watched the movie My Big Fat Greek Wedding,
Oh, sure.
where
Yeah.
there was that remember that moment where mom is trying to talk dad into allowing the daughter to take computer class, and she's like, the key point here is he has to think he came up with it. And
Yes.
then she didn't have to do any persuasion. She just basically planted this idea, and he said, why doesn't she do this? And it's kind of very similar situation, I think. But I really like that. That is interesting, and I love this perspective. I especially love this perspective because a lot of people, I think, are very confused in terms of how to speak assertively. And because I
And you
teach
just
people,
ask questions. You just ask questions is all you do. If you want to influence, you're not going to say, this is what we're doing, right? Like
right,
nobody wants to be controlled. Nobody wants to be told what to do. Everybody wants to have their genius taken to the forefront. Your job as a leader is to do so. My definition of leadership is to teach somebody how to think so that they can get what they want. Okay. So now that makes me, as the leader of the company, I have to align myself with people who the conflicting points of view are great. Okay. And it's healthy to have, different points of view. Yet for the priorities, the core, the gist of what you're intending to do, you have to make sure you're leading people that align with the mission, align with the vision, and the vision's where you're going, the mission's how you're going to get there, and aligned with the culture, which is how we're going to treat each other. Okay, so those are the three fundamentals of anybody who you're leading, that it's required that you have alignment on that. Now, dissension outside of that is really, really healthy in tactical decisions and that type of stuff. Okay. And when you're able to have cohesion and mission, vision, and culture and beliefs, then you're going to be able to then um, guide those people by asking them questions so that, again, they're the ones that are making the decisions and you're guiding them by just asking them the deep diving questions.
right. And that's basically where your influence begins to really work because you're influencing them without them really feeling that you're influencing them.
Right. And it's ultimately, it's like you want to find win-win situations.
Right.
You want the people who you're leading, whether it's a client or a staff, you want them to feel like they won. Right. And if you can
Absolutely.
align your win with their win, guess what? Now we're good.
Yeah. And this very much aligns with, I know one of the things that you like to talk about is how to help people say yes without feeling sold, which is exactly what you talked about here. You don't want people to feel sold.
Never,
You
never.
want you don't want people to feel that you're pushing your agenda on them. And I think this is very, very important. And I really want everybody to hear this. You have an agenda in that corporate meeting. But if you just try to be a bully and push that agenda, which, a lot of people go like, well, I was told I need to be assertive. I was told I need to be, holding up for my whatever I want. It's a lot more nuanced than that.
Yeah, let me give you a language shift, right? To be able to use this like in real. So I gave you like the philosophy shift, right? Well, now we give you
Hmm.
tacticals. So instead of saying, for example, say you're leading a meeting or you're participating in a meeting, and they come to you and say, "Okay, Victoria, your turn." And let's not use you. Let's just use Bob, a random Bob, and they say, "Bob, your turn." And Bob says, "Well, I think," or "I feel," and then Bob shares his story, right? Instead of saying "I think," instead of saying "I feel," consider replace that with, well, here's what matters to us, or here's what matters to you. Okay. You don't want to use I or me. Like it's about the other person, right? So instead of, again, like, I think we should do X, you could say something like, well, based on your priorities, this option keeps us moving toward your goal, right? And so then but these frameworks, you have to first go through the CPI model, to a communication model, to be able to get to these frameworks, to be able to then influence, right? And it's about shifting your language and understanding how you're shifting and who you're shifting it for.
Hmm. Then I love this because our philosophies and just the way we think is so much aligned. Like this is literally how I teach public speaking confidence, like very much aligned with how you're teaching sales is focus on what other people need,
Of course.
not
Yeah, always.
on your own agenda. Love
And then
this.
get those in alignment, right? It's not to say that you're
Right.
ignoring your own goals. It's saying you focus on them first, and then does that match with what you're intending to do? If it does, boom, you're good. If it doesn't, you have to make some adjustments, whether adjusting who you're talking to or adjusting the idea or something. But it's think about the other first.
Right. And the last question, as far as persuasive ethical selling, if you're trying to sell yourself, let's say there is a position that opened up within an organization, higher position, and you are trying to get promoted to that position. How do you, in light of everything we talked about, how do you talk about that promotion to people who are in charge of that position, finding a person for that position?
You're not approaching, this is a little bit counterintuitive, right? You're not necessarily approaching it with selling yourself. You're approaching it with identifying their need. So it's always the same concept, right? So let's say I'm a middle level manager and I have an opportunity to be a senior manager. And the first thing and then there's like a CEO above that or a CFO or something above that, and that in a hiring manager. So the first thing I have to identify is that role that I'm being considered for. What is the greatest problem that role has or that department has, right? What's their biggest struggle? What's their biggest obstacles? What's their biggest rock in their shoe or thorn in their side? And when I understand that, now I speak to that problem first. And I show them that problem, whatever it may be, can have a different outcome. Okay. So if you imagine on the left side, you have your problem, and that problem is going to be internal and external. Okay. So let's say let's just say the hiring manager. So the hiring manager is potentially hiring you, and they have a problem that if they don't fill this role, right, that problem externally could be, we're not going to sell enough widgets. Okay. And then there's ongoing problems from there. And now we're going to lose revenue. And now our costs are going to skyrocket. And now those are all external problems. And then you identify, well, what's the internal problem? The internal problem is, well, if you're that leader, you're going to feel bad, right? You're going to feel anxious. You're going to feel stressed, right? It's everything that you feel. And so you start with the internal and the external problem of the role that you're applying for. And then how do you transform that problem into a desire? Like, what would the desired outcome be? All right. So the desired outcome would be more profit, more widgets, better employees, better morale, and whatever the case may be. And so now in the framework of this, you start, and there's going to be external and internal desires. Okay. So you start with the external desire of the hiring manager of what solves their problem. And then you say, my role, Mr. or Mrs. Hiring Manager, is to be able to get you to your desire. And then you demonstrate how you're able to bridge that gap. Okay. So that again is a framework that I go through in the book, Teach to Sell, that outlines that step by step so that influence works, whether if you're applying for a promotion, or you're helping a client, or you're helping a colleague, or you're helping somebody who you lead. The frameworks work in any case.
Love this. What it sounds like that everybody who is listening to this needs to go and buy that book. So Dan, can you please, I would. Dan, can you please talk about the book a little bit? It's coming out on June 23rd, right? Can you tell a little bit more about the book, where to get it, what's in the book, and why everybody would want to go and get it?
Sure. The book is called Teach to Sell: Why Top Salespeople Never Sell and What They Do Instead. And it's about ethically influencing, right? And so if you're in a leadership role, if you're in the corporate world, if you're intending to get better results, and if you're tired of having high, employee turnover, or having that stress of, man, like I just asked that guy to do this and it didn't get done again, and it's going to be too costly for me to fire this guy and rehire them, and you're challenged with the long hours and the stress. The Teach to Sell shows you how to be able to structure your life, your leadership, so that you can get what you want. And people can go and take a look at www.teachtosellbook.com. That's teachtosellbook.com. And when they go through that website, of course, they can get on Books A Million or Amazon or Barnes and Nobles or any place. But if you go to teachtosellbook.com, then there's 4 pillars that I go through in the book: belief, how to find business, how to be able to scale your organization, and leadership. And so those are the 4 pillars in the book. And when you go to that website, teachtosellbook.com, you'll get an access to what we used to charge $10,000 in training. to be able to go through an on-demand training that you'll walk through step by step with the book. That took us about 5 years or so to develop. So it's a pretty amazing bonus. And whether if you get it before the launch date or after, that website should still be available for you to discover.
And at the time that you're listening to this book is already available. So go ahead and get it. Dan, thank you so much. How can my listeners learn more about you? They're already going to go and get the book. We already know that. But how can they learn more about you? What's your website and how else they can know more about you?
Absolutely. So teachyourselfbook.com to get access to the book directly. www.nobrokemonth.com. If you're interested, I got a really cool hypnotic and neurolinguistic programming guide to communication, to ethical influence. And so that's a free resource. We've got tons of free stuff at nobrokemonths.com. And just check it out. And outside that, you can always hit me up on social, Dan Rochon, Rochon. I'd love to be your friend, and I would love to connect with you in the real world as well.
Wonderful. Dan, thank you for coming to the podcast. I really enjoyed talking to you.
You're welcome.
Thank you so much for joining us for this conversation with Dan Rochon. I hope this episode gave you a fresh perspective on influence, communication, and the idea that we are all selling something every day, whether it's a product, an idea, or ourselves. The key is learning how to do it authentically and ethically. And if you enjoyed this episode, be sure to subscribe, leave a review, and share it with someone who could benefit from becoming a more confident communicator. Thank you for listening, and I'll see you in the next episode. Bye for now.